We'll just wait for a couple of minutes and then we'll start the event. Yeah.
Nick, thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we start our event, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodians of the land on which this event is taking place. We would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their ongoing connection to the land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. We also extend respect to the ones who are present here today. Now, this event is very close to my heart for various reasons. Expecting to graduate in less than 15 days, I would say I'm experiencing a lot of pressure and stress that every graduate would feel to nail those interviews and find the role that they are passionate about. I'm as excited as everyone who have joined here to learn all those new tips and tricks. Today, we will be hearing from recruitment, learning and development, and diversity experts from our partner CBRE, who would shed some light on behind the scenes of recruitment and how to ace an interview. To moderate this session, we have amongst us Tyrone, who volunteers as an events coordinator for Outfit Australia and is currently Telstra's 2019 to 20 Sydney HR graduate working in their employee experience and engagement team. Using his personal experience and research of the graduate recruitment process, in his spare time, he coaches and creates resources to help prospective university graduates find their dream job. Thank you, Tyrone, for moderating the session. Now, introducing our first speaker tonight, Ingrid Massey, leads the talent, diversity function for CBRE across Pacific, working within a global organization to ensure learning strategy, transformation programs, and inclusion initiatives translate to business outcomes. Pertaining to her 20 years of experience in diverse industries, Ingrid has a solid understanding of how human resources, diversity, and learning can partner effectively together to help attract, grow, and retain top talent in order to innovate and drive results. Her passion lies in developing inclusive leadership capabilities and coaching others, driving cultural change and enabling careers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. That's a lovely introduction, and looking forward tonight to getting you your first step or your first real job. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Our next speaker tonight is Philippa McQueen. She is CBRE's Pacific Lead and Team Manager for Pacific Advisory Talent Acquisition Function. With over 8 years experience in recruitment and talent acquisition, Philippa has worked both in in-house talent teams and external recruitment agencies across both commercial and educational sectors. Philippa is passionate about utilizing technology to enhance the recruitment process and ensure a positive customer-employee experience. Philippa also highlights the importance of focusing on diversity and inclusion initiatives throughout the talent process to ensure the best hires for CBRE. This is an amazing opportunity to hear from the absolute best in the industry. And without any further ado, I would hand it over to you, Tyrone.
Awesome. Thank you, Ravi. So I think we'll almost get the discussion started. But before I begin, I'm excited to be here and also to share some of my experiences of the whole graduate recruitment process, because I know it can be quite stressful. I think I applied over like 40 organizations before I got a job, but very grateful to Out for Australia as well, who also supported me. So I guess we'll hop into our discussion, and we have some pre-prepped questions, but there's also some questions that some of you have already submitted to us, so we'll be able to go through them. And if anybody at all, at any time, has any questions, please feel free to pop them in to the Q&A, and we'll have them answered at the end. So I think we might get started, and I think Ingrid might have a PowerPoint as well. And we might get started with our first question, which is, so I might direct this to Philippa. So how do you make your application stand out to recruiters? What might that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tyrone. I think obviously that's a really important part of the process. And as you said, you applied for several roles before being successful. And that's an experience that a lot of graduates do have. Graduate Australia tells us that only 3% of grads that apply for specific roles are actually successful. So it is really important to, set yourself apart from the application process. One of the really key things I think is content. So content is key. Making sure that you're tailoring your cover letter and your CV for the role that you're applying for. The amount of applications that I've seen over the years that might say, dear hiring manager at, Coca-Cola or Deloitte when they're applying for a position at CBRE, it immediately speaks to the recruiter to say that you've not, gone above and beyond in terms of tailoring the content that you're delivering to them. Clear layout is really important as well. There are a lot of really good templates available. So Canva, Seek, and also the resume builder within the Microsoft Word function are really good if you're not really sure where to go with your application. But I think having clear layout is really important. Doing your research, so understanding why you want to work for that particular company. Look at how they're performing in the market, go on their website, look on their LinkedIn, any awards that they've won, and make sure that you're able to articulate why you would like to work for that particular company, even at application stage, is really important. Another thing that I would say is absolutely add the extras. Tell us more about you. We want to hear about you as an individual. So make sure you include any extracurriculars that you've done, passion projects, volunteering, and any interests that you may have. Triple check for errors. It may sound simple, but with, within an application, any sort of simple grammatical errors may cost you the job. So I think looking over your work and getting somebody to look over your work for you is really important. Making sure that you have an online presence that's meaningful. So think about not only your LinkedIn, but your Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and make sure that that reflects how you want to be represented to a potential employer, and make sure it's something that you're proud of and reflects you. And the other thing that I'll say is don't wait to the last minute. There's so many grad jobs out there and they're all on different cycles. So if you're using a website like Grad Australia, make sure that you've diarised the specific dates and cutoffs, and that you have all of the resources that you need for that application so that you can be successful.
And Philippa, just to jump in there, that stat, 3% of grads get their role, and that's just in that first instance. Look, in the corporate world and in the sales world, it's a numbers game. So don't make your first interview the one that you really, 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 really want. Line up for 100 interviews, make those mistakes, and at the end of every interview that you don't get, just ask for a little bit of feedback. Can you give me one tip to improve for next time? So every time you are kind of incrementally improving, so you are giving your best performance for that role that you really want. So think of 100 interviews that you need to have to get 3 jobs. Might be a helpful kind of ratio.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ingrid.
And I might just add on to what Philippa was talking about your resumes and your cover letters. A lot of universities actually have a lot of support services for you available to you. And a lot of the people in like their careers and employment centers, they're actually ex-recruiters who are really, really helpful. So I'll definitely check with your educational institution if they have that kind of team at your university. And also in terms of, Philippa, just a question around like a digital footprint and how people should be covering up their tracks. What if they had something on their Facebook that they've just been tagged in like a meme or something? Do you ever search just Google and see things that maybe people should cover up?
Yeah, so recruiters do often search your history. So if there's things on there that maybe you're not comfortable with on, on your Facebook, for example, you can absolutely make your profiles private. And I think that's something that's really important to do. But then you do want to make sure that you have some sort of online presence. So it may be that you're channeling your information onto your LinkedIn, that you're liking and commenting on relevant content. I think that's a really, really smart way to sort of enhance your online presence and making it more meaningful for your job search.
That's a good point, Tyrone, as well. Just think about your email address. Is it hotmama@gmail.com? Is it Big Tyrone? I don't know. Think about a corporate or appropriate email just in that very first instance. The other piece is, again, to stand out. If all grads are grads, what makes you different? I remember in my early days, my first career was in advertising, and I used to start my cover letter with 1 lump or 2. And people would sort of think, oh, and I even got into interviews and they said, the reason why you're here, Ingrid, is because of that cover letter. And I would then start the cover letter saying, I am so confident that I can apply my skills from X, Y, and Z to you organizer. I'd like to buy you a coffee. So how do you take your coffee? Just think, what is your angle? And how can you really grab their attention? Almost get a boring audit, get your mates to have a look and see, is there something you can step up? Obviously sort of in line as well with the company that you're applying for. So I just went with the coffee angle, but you can get a little bit more creative. You can send a sneaker with a little floating balloon saying I'm a shoe-in for this job. It's been done before, but just try and differentiate yourself as well.
Absolutely. And think of your elevator pitch as well. So how you're going to sell yourself in 2 minutes if you need to. And if you're struggling to think of things, ask your friends and family about what the good qualities are that you may have, or, colleagues from other roles that you may have had in the past is a really good way to get a foundation for that as well.
Awesome. Okay, I think we might move on. So we'll move on to the next question. So what can the application process look like?
Excellent. So we've got a slide here of what the CBRE application process looks like. So this can absolutely vary from company to company, but I think it's really important to understand the types of things that you might ask to be do throughout the process. So you may be reached out to by a recruiter for a phone interview. And that may happen at any point. It may happen to you when you're, on the commute home. I think something that is really important is that when you're applying for grad roles, be ready, have a notebook with you with some pre-prepared answers that you may have already thought about from before, and make sure that you're ready to take a call at any point. Obviously, it's okay for you to ask to call back, but I think being organised is really good, particularly when recruiters are speaking to a number of people. The other thing which we'll go into more detail is around video interviewing. So 60% of companies now use video interviewing at some point during the recruitment process. I think a couple of years ago, it was probably quite new and people didn't quite know, how to use the technology or felt a bit uncomfortable. I think in the environment that we're in at the moment, we're all very comfortable, particularly with COVID, being on Zoom. But I think it's really important to make sure that you understand whether it's a Zoom, whether it's a Teams call, whether you're using Google Hangouts, and making sure that you're prepared for that. It may also be a live video or it might be a recorded video. The other thing would be face-to-face. So that may include a panel interview or assessment centres, and then further assessments. So those two might be switched around in some companies. So you might do sort of any kind of gamification or psych testing first before progressing to a face-to-face interview. So that can definitely be fluid in the process. And then you'd move on to sort of more final parts of the process, which would be sort of reference checking before you would receive your offer.
Awesome. Thanks, Philippa. I definitely agree in terms of that phone call, always being ready. I remember when I was at the beach and I was called in for my Deloitte assessment center. She started asking me questions at the beach, but I actually did that. I actually had a page of all my responses for every single company that I applied for and what I would say, but also having that elevator pitch at the back of my mind, being able to just spill why I wanted to work there and like what I was interested in. And I'd also think about now that we're moving into more of this COVID environment, a lot of organizations are also moving their recruitment processes online, like totally digital. I know that Telstra's done that. I know that Westpac is starting to, all of their assessment centers are now online. And I think that depending on what kind of stream you're going into, there could be case studies as well. And I think a good thing to like keep in mind as well throughout application processes for particular companies is that it's good to reach out to people who are already successful in the graduate program or like the actual entry level role, and just reach out to them on LinkedIn. Or maybe there's somebody that's gone to your university that you can reach out to, or somebody that you've met at university, and you can just gain their experience about their whole recruitment process from start to finish. And that just gives you that insider perspective about what the recruiters are looking for, what they did to kind of make their way in. And another comment about the video interview. So my video interview for my year for Telstra, it was used as the best practice. They used that as like the best practice video interview. So yeah, so they actually after that year they actually deleted it, so we can't actually see it. But my top tip is to make it really interesting, especially if you're in a recruitment process where there's over like 7,000 applications. You have to make your video interview interesting. Otherwise, there are recruiters sitting there watching your interviews, watching all these interviews, and all they're hearing is, I want to join such and such because, versus another candidate that's just like, hi, I'm Tyrone. These are the 3 key reasons of why I will add value to your organization. So that sort of difference, you can kind of get a sense of what the recruiter would be more attracted to. But yeah, definitely think about putting yourself ahead of the curve, doing that research and reaching out to people that you think will be able to give you that insider knowledge.
Tyrone, I love it. I'd hire you in a heartbeat. I would also add, for those of you out there who may have a disability, this is your time to shine. Purely digital recruitment pathways, as Tyrone mentioned, are your advantage. So that there's a big tick for disabilities in this COVID. One of the good things. The second piece, we know we are presenting here, so make sure you look good. I don't care if you haven't had a shower for 4 days. Get the dry shampoo, get the curler out. Just do this bit. Okay, and make sure that's looking good. Make your bed if you can see it in the background. Center yourself, lift your camera up. And for those of you who are shy or don't like presenting to camera, go get your favorite person. It could be your mum, it could be Ryan Gosling, and take a little photo cutout, put a little hole and stick it directly over the camera and talk to Ryan. There's my top tip.
Thanks, Ingrid.
Awesome, thank you. I think we might move on. So what are the top tips for a video interview? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So we'll go through some of these, but we've touched on a couple already. One of the number one tips I would say is absolutely test your tech beforehand. As I mentioned, you might be using Zoom, Google Hangouts, Teams. There are a lot of different systems out there, so make sure that you've tested it and you made sure that you're really comfortable with it. Check your internet connection. So hopefully you're not like me 5 minutes before today, stressing about the connectivity. Make sure that if you know that your internet connection isn't stable, that perhaps you go to a friend's house or somewhere that's you know you're going to have consistent internet. Lights, camera, action. So make sure that, like Ingrid said, that you're centered in the room. You've got enough natural light so that the recruiter can see you. That's the whole part of the video. We want to see who you are and want to be able to, make sure that we can see you properly. Free from disruptions. So obviously I understand it's the real world and you can't stop your neighbor that's always out blowing leaves, or the bin man that happens to come by at the wrong time, or the neighbor's dog. But where possible, if you can make sure that you go into a room that's private, you might put a post-it note on the door that says, "Mum, I'm in an interview, don't knock now, knock later." But just make sure where possible that you can, have a fairly non-disrupted environment. As Ingrid said, dress for success, even if that's trackies on bottom, top up top, and make sure that you're presentable, particularly depending on the environment or the organization that you're looking to work. You may want to tailor that as well. Ensure a clean and plain background. I've seen hundreds of video interviews and I see insight into people's lives and living rooms, and it's very interesting. But what we really want to see is you, and the focus to be on you throughout that interview. And the other thing I would say is absolutely do the practice questions. It will give you an understanding of how long you've got to read the question if it's a pre-recorded, how long you've got to answer, and how long you might have in between to collect your thoughts. So definitely do the practice questions as well. Really important. Another thing, throughout the interview process, both in formal face-to-face interviews and video interviews, we use behavioural interviewing. So make sure that you have pre-prepared examples or have thought about examples using the STAR technique, which is situation, task, action, and result. So think of examples of situations that you've been in. The questions are generally going to start with something like, tell me about a time when. And so you want to be able to think about sort of key areas where you've demonstrated key skills. And then the other thing is clear communication. Make sure that you articulate well, that you're slow in your comms, and that you've got sort of a good level of volume so that the recruiter can hear you as well. And the last thing that I would say is have fun with it. As Tyrone says, you want to stand out and show your personality. And I've had quite a few video interviews, particularly recently, where people are at home and maybe their pets have got a little used to them being at home. And they might have had their dog jump onto their lap. And initially they're a bit like, oh, this was not part of my plan, but they've worked that into their interview and, talked about their pet, but then moved on. And the other thing I think as well, often at the end, you'll get time to ask a question or talk about yourself. And I think that time is really important. That's your time for your elevator pitch. That's your time to differentiate yourself from all the other people that have come before you in the interview process, and that you can really, shine and talk about yourself as an individual. So I think that's really important. Have I missed anything, Ingrid?
Just add, probably one of the experiences that has stuck with me over the years is early days. I applied for one of the big banks, and I was all prepped. I had my behavioural interviewing STAR technique for all my experiences. And then the recruiter, this was a face-to-face, he said to me, "Oh, just talk me through what you've been doing with your career so far." And I started, I in a past life was a tour guide in Europe. And this guy had actually been on one of the tours, not mine, but he said, oh, and he was interested. And we started to talk about that. And he explained what he did. I explained what I did. And then we finished the interview and I didn't get the job. I rang up afterwards and said, that's really disappointing, but please, I'm wanting to learn. Any feedback? And they basically said, you didn't talk about your relevant experience. And I was gutted because I went with the lead of the interviewer, but that was my mistake. It is not a conversation. What are my 3 points I'm trying to get across? And if the chit chat is about your favorite soccer team or netball or whatever you're doing, with a steely mind, lead that conversation back to the time that you turned around an entire department, or saved money on stationery, or brought together a team that was dysfunctional in your netball team. But you need to lead that, because the time is the time, and they'll only remember that conversation. So it's not a conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Philippa and Ingrid. So move on. So we know about video interviews, but how would a student ace their face-to-face interview?
Yeah, so there's a lot of similar things that we've sort of already gone through. And I think the first one is absolutely doing your research. So not just going on the company website, there's so much more information out there now. I'd really encourage you to visit the LinkedIn of the hiring manager or the recruiter that you are potentially meeting with, to understand what their backgrounds and education may be. Look at any sort of marketing information, any awards that the company has won recently, anything that they've been in the media, their social media pages. So there's so much more that you can do from a research perspective with the internet at our fingertips. There's really no excuse to come to an interview and not be prepared. The other thing that we've obviously touched on, and Ingrid's just highlighted, is practicing your answers using the STAR technique. I think this is really important. Dressing to impress, so making sure that you are, in a professional business attire, if that's the type of environment that you're going into for an interview. As Tyrone said earlier, bringing positive energy and confidence to the interview is really important. And I can appreciate that not everyone loves interviewing, but there are a few things that you can do, like going into the bathroom and standing in a superwoman position to boost your confidence before you walk into that room. Or, it might be something else that's going to get you energized, listening to your favorite song, or whatever it may be that gets you in a positive mindset before you walk into that room, so that you've got a positive energy. Be early, not just on time. So making sure that you've checked your bus route, make sure that you've made sure that there's no delays on the train, and that you know where you're going and how to get there. We do often get candidates calling us saying they're going to be 10 minutes late because the train's broken down, and it's just not a good look. So where possible, if you can be early, you then get to sit in reception, and you might get to see interactions in the office that really give you an insight into the culture. And also just remember that you are essentially being assessed from the moment that you walk into that office. So make sure that you are, being friendly to the reception staff and anyone else that you might meet along the way until you leave that building. Make sure that you've got questions that are ready to go, that are intelligent, and that might be things that you want to find out about the process or the company and the role. But make sure they're not things that have already been covered in the position description, and that you're really using that time wisely. Be your authentic self. That's really important. The interviewer wants to understand about yourself, and experiences that you've had as well. This is what Ingrid has just mentioned is really important, is tying your answers back to your skills and accomplishments. So even if that conversation does direct in another direction, making sure that you can, steer the conversation back and link it in to work in your favor. Keeping your answers concise is a really good one. And another thing I will say is don't speak negatively about your previous employers. We do have people come into interview from time to time to say, oh, I left that job because the boss wasn't very good. I just think it brings a negative element, and it's not something that needs to be discussed in the interview. And the final thing I would say is send a follow-up and a thank you note. You'd be surprised about how many people don't do that, and that may really set you apart.
And I'll just add, Pip or Philippa, on that research front, that's not only about the company, but the interviewers. So if you can get the names of who you're interviewing with, stalk them, stalk their social media profile. And you don't have to be stalker creepy, but you might weave it in just at the end saying, oh, that's great, interesting. So you're a lifesaver, are you at Manly Beach? And just to kind of let them know that you've done your homework as well. It can give you some opportunities to create that quick rapport over the next person who's coming from a cold start.
Yeah, and the research doesn't just need to be about the company as well. It can be about competitors and making commentary around some of the competitors, or wins that the company may have had over one of their competitors is really smart as well.
Definitely. And just to add on there, I think for interviews, especially understanding best practice and kind of thought leadership within your particular industry, it's always good to have a mentor. And that's something that's we have here at Out for Australia. That's our main thing. We have a mentoring program. And I definitely have, my mentor was in HR, and he was able to provide me with all of the thought leadership and current trends within HR. And I use that within a lot of my interviews. So definitely think about that, and also using LinkedIn as a resource of all of that thought leadership as well. So I think we might move on. So how out should somebody be in the recruitment process?
So before I answer that, Tyrone, I'd love to ask you, how out were you in your interview process?
Yes, that's a good question. So in terms of how I framed it in the interview process, I didn't really mask my personality. I was just really like, I'm quite flamboyant, energetic, but I wouldn't really just go into an interview and say, oh, I am gay. It was kind of why I kind of integrated it in, I want to work for this organization because you value people for bringing their whole selves to work. It doesn't matter about sexual preference or gender. You hire them for their skill, their talent, and that's why I want to work here. It's never, that's kind of how I integrated it. But it's also, think about the organizations that also you're applying for. It's good to be selective. It depends. I know it's hard if you just want to apply for any organization just to get a job. But then you can also be selective and also look at some of the awards that some organizations have won. So I use the Australian Workplace Equality Index, and also the memberships of like Pride and Diversity, those sorts of things, to kind of guide the decision making of who I really wanted to work for.
Yeah, exactly what Tyrone said. I think for any of you who are unsure, the base answer is you don't need to. It's irrelevant to the purpose of the interview and that recruitment process, which is, can you do the role? So it's your sexual preference or orientation is not relevant. That said, there are some people who absolutely want to bring their whole self to work. And so, as Tyrone mentioned, do your research. Be looking. AWEI is certainly one of the great kind of benchmarks, bronze, silver, gold accreditation and higher. The choreographer on the Mardi Gras float this year, he worked for Deloitte, and he said one of the main reasons he wanted to work there, he was in the office and he saw this coffee table magazine, and it had the Out 50, the top 50 partners in Deloitte globally that champion the LGBTI approach and concepts and inclusive working environment. So spot on. If you don't want to actually reveal, again, you can allude to ask questions. What kind of inclusive practices do you have here? Certainly would be a question that I would ask. But you're going to do what you're going to do. I mean, I would suggest be focusing in that interview process on, can you get the job? Can you perform the role? And then possibly there's opportunities later. Totally up to you. I also would consider as well, if it is a global organisation, consider that in some countries, homosexuality, for example, is illegal. Malaysia, India. If you are working for a global organisation, maybe some of your interview panelists may be coming from those environments. So it's a tricky situation to navigate. And just the baseline is you don't have to. Of course you can, or you can allude to it. I will add as well, so I worked for Qantas for 9 years. Never once in a very friendly environment, certainly with a very out and open CEO, did anyone ever mention it in the interview process for the teams that I recruited. The other piece is I had an awesome operator who applied for a coordinator role in my team, and she was out in the interview, and then she talked about all the great things she could do for D&I. And she was not successful in the role, probably because I thought she was so focused on that the actual administrative coordination component of the role would be a bit boring for her. And she wanted to be over here doing this great work, but the role is what it is. So just a kind of an employer perspective for your consideration.
Awesome. Thanks, Ingrid. So move on. So in terms of recruitment trends, how has COVID-19 changed the recruitment landscape?
Yeah, thanks, Tyrone. So COVID has impacted us in so many ways, and unfortunately it has impacted the recruitment landscape, and particularly for the grad area as well. I think we will see fewer roles and smaller intakes, and potentially delayed intakes as well. So where there may have typically been a mid-year intake for a company, it may be something that's later on in the year. And unfortunately, it's going to make what is already a very competitive process more competitive. So I think all of the things that we've talked about today about setting yourself apart are really important. Many companies, I think, bear in mind, are still navigating that return to work piece. So for their entire workforce. So graduate recruitment might be slightly delayed. It may be that there's a lot more of it happening online at the moment, but intake days may be pushed out in the future. I think it's unavoidable that the process is going to be a lot more virtual than it ever has before, because we have the technology that allows for it. So as Tyrone mentioned with Telstra, it sounds like they've completely automated and used technology for their entire grad process. Now, not every company is going to do that, but it will mean that it plays a really key part throughout the process. So the video interview, the gamification, and the skills and assessments that you're going to do are more important than ever. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing for you, as Ingrid said. The other thing that I think will still come into play, but will be interesting to see when we get back into the office, will be around assessment centres. So they will definitely still be a part of the process for certain roles. It may look and feel a little bit different, obviously, with social distancing. But I think one of the key things with assessment centres is really around how you communicate, how you interact with others, and how you can work as a part of a team. One of the other key things that they really look for in assessment centres is not how much you go in knowing already, but how much active listening that you can do. So if you have to do a role play, for example, and it might be a really tricky role play and it's not something that everyone's comfortable doing, they'll give you feedback in that assessment centre. And what they really want to see is how you've listened to the feedback and then how you've taken that on board. So being able to adapt, listen to feedback, and then take that on in your next role play that you may do with them. The other thing that might be really good to do is think about industries that have essentially grown or developed through the COVID period. So you might want to look at technology companies, for example, or the health and medical industry, or pharmaceuticals, FMCG, companies that may actually be dialing up their recruitment and graduate intakes versus those companies that may need to dial back down due to budget constraints. So I think there's definitely opportunity in some markets more than others. So it's definitely worthwhile doing your research and then maybe focusing attention on areas that you haven't necessarily thought about before.
You're on mute, Tyrone.
Sorry about that. So how do you think graduates can adapt to the changing environment, and what kind of skills do you think are most critical at this time?
Well, oh, look, here we go. We had all of that. Sorry, Philippa, I should have given you that visual there. Okay, so adapting to changing environment, similar veins. I know you've got questions, and so really we won't labour these points, but back to the point, that gamification, maybe job assessments in the beginning of the job process. I know Unilever, for example, use that. Go get experience, go Google brain games and logical puzzles and things like that to get pretty swift and savvy on that. Make sure you're comfortable presenting to camera. And really, I think the data skills are important. So looking at opportunities, I think 10 years ago, it was sometimes hard to learn new information, but now it's almost, I can learn anything with Google. It's just how do I filter out what's important and what's not. So if you look at skills for the future, and I'll share a few that are coming up on the non-data side, on the people side, but there are roles that are always going to be around and won't be taken by machines, let's say, and they are the ones that require innovation. They are the ones that require communication. So in terms of kind of negotiation, influencing teams, inspiring others. Yes, the basic chatbots can move into customer service frontline roles, for example, but thinking about those kinds of elements will be helpful. The other thing is when you look at the Australian Association of Graduate Employers, still 60% of employers are looking for academic results. So if you are 15 days away or whatever you are, or you're graduating at the end of the year, head down to the finish, focus. We know that we're better when we're monotasking, so get that great result. The other piece is 97% of employers feel that teamwork skills are indispensable. So maybe if you have a choice, and no right or wrong here, but if you're looking for $1 to pay the rent and you have an option between an Uber Eats bike rider and working in a call centre, depending what you ultimately want to do, how could you position that in a job interview? So if I'm in a call center and I'm dealing with escalating client issues, trying to, change their NBN network or whatever it is, I could probably create a great communication response in an interview around that piece. Uber Eats as well, maybe it's something about the pressures of multitasking, and some employers are looking for those who can juggle university life with full-time or part-time work, because they know if you've managed to get through the other end with a pass mark, then you are someone who is very focused and you can be very organised and manage yourself to make things happen. So there's all those overlays to consider. Just sharing with you, and this was a PwC report coming from the World Economic Forum, is these skills will always, the view is up to 2030, be in high demand and cannot be subbed out by artificial intelligence or machine thinking. So if you are doing your part-time jobs that could somehow relate to this, or it could be a sport that you're doing or a hobby, in an interest group, for example, all of that is speaking to your skills that you can apply to the workforce. The other thing is just, moving around, cultural agility, living in other places can also demonstrate your ability to seek out, make connections, find out how things work around here, and basically reducing that shift that the hiring manager or the recruiter is thinking, can I see Tyrone in my organisation? And if it's not a big gap, then I think I might go for him. If it's too big and I can't see you fitting in around here or making that transition, then I'll probably go with the easier choice, for example.
Awesome. Thanks, Ingrid. So I think we might move on to some of the questions that are coming in, and this is a really popular question that has been asked quite a few times now, is around international students. So what can international students actually implement? What strategies can they use so that they could be more likely to be successful within a graduate recruitment process or entry-level role?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tyrone. So I think there's a few key things, and obviously working rights is a part of it, and we don't really need to touch on that because it's people are aware of what working rights they have to in order to be able to apply. But I think really demonstrating those working rights and displaying those on your CV are really important. Also, prioritizing any local experience and education that you may have first on your resume, really important. We don't want to see resumes that are 10 pages long. So whenever you're putting your resume together, whether you're an international student or not, make sure that you're putting the most relevant information first and spending the most time articulating that experience. A really important thing would be articulating and demonstrating any local community involvement. So any groups that you've joined in university, or any extracurricular activities or communities that you've been a part of, absolutely putting those on your application and resume. If you do have experience working overseas and in overseas based companies, just making sure that you spend a bit more time talking about what the organisation did for somebody that may be reviewing your application that hasn't necessarily heard of the company before. The scope of the role, the size of the company, and the complexity as well might be really helpful for the recruiter to understand what your role was in that company and how that might be equivalent to something in the local market. Another thing I would say, and this is again for international and non-international students, would be absolutely get somebody to check your work. Making sure that punctuation and grammar and spelling is on point is really important, but also really to ensure that language is translating appropriately because it can be challenging at times. So having that other person look over your CV or application before submitting it is really important as well. And the other thing that I would say is apply to companies that are aligned to your values. Now, that's not specific to international students, that's all students, but think about the types of companies that you would like to work for and that have values that are aligned to you, and make sure that you apply for those ones as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Philippa. And I think we also have like another question coming in around regional Australia. So do you have any advice on how to apply for jobs in capital cities while being regional?
Well, I think that we're really lucky, at the moment with, the technology that we have, that you can apply for a role anywhere. Depending, you don't need to be in that capital city to apply, and having things like video interviews and gamification allow you to ultimately have the same experience as everyone else, no matter where you are. We have candidates that might be on a gap year overseas and will apply. And I actually watched a video interview of somebody that was successful, and they were in Safari actually, and they timed the timing so that they could make their video interview and submit it. So I think it doesn't matter where you are in the world now. With technology, we're really lucky to be able to do that, and it doesn't really restrict you from making applications.
Awesome. Thanks, Philippa. And we have another question here. I think I might be able to start off. So do you think the type of industries matter when it comes to creating an energetic, rather gleeful video interview? I'm just thinking areas like marketing or HR may work, but not too sure with business consultancies or law firms. I think from my experience, I was the same in all of my video interviews. I feel like it never really stopped me from progressing, especially going for organizations like Deloitte, consultancy, or entering more generalist graduate programs, me versing people who were graduating as law students, like Qantas. So those sorts of things. I don't necessarily think it really matters what industry you're applying for, as long as you show your personality. I think that's really important. But I'd love to get Philip.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with you there in terms of, being true to yourself. But I think if you're applying to companies that align with your values, then you'll probably, be able to be yourself in that interview as well. if you're applying for companies that don't have similar values to yourself, you may find that misalignment. But Ingrid, anything that you have to add on there, would love to hear too.
Yes, and I saw a few of those Q&A questions, you know, how zany, maybe some of those examples that I shared at one end of the spectrum. I think to Tyrone's point, you are who you are. If that's not you, don't try and be super zany. When presenting to camera, the recommended advice is be you plus 10% energy. So get a trusted friend, practice speaking, a couple of hand gestures in the frame, okay, not sort of all just face, but, you know, 1 point, that kind of thing can be quite powerful. And this steepled hand gesture is a power pose. So if you're asked a question, you'll see politicians do it all of the time, even our least preferred ones. It could be a consideration, put yourself in a steeple finger a position and then pause and respond. The other thing is, if you're on the back foot and you're asked a question and you need some time, maybe have a glass of water, bring it into frame so it's a reason for a pause, and then continue and try and nail that response.
Awesome. And we'll go to another live question around are zany application letters really taken seriously from your perspective as recruiters?
Sorry, was that a zany applications really taken seriously? I think it really depends how far down the spectrum you go in terms of what you submit. I think it's all about being true to yourself, but having a positive energy. And you might want to do something that's a little bit outside the box, but you still want to make sure that you're focusing on articulating your skills, that you're presenting well. So I think it's great to think of different ideas that might get the recruiter's attention, but you don't want to take away from, you know, the skills and experience that you want to be able to articulate to them that you have. So I think make sure that it's trying to find that balance between, you know, doing something a little bit different and out there, but still remembering what the point of the interview is and making sure that you demonstrate those skills.
Awesome.
And I would say a little bit further in your career, I know a senior lawyer who on her CV and in her LinkedIn profile has, I help CEOs stay out of jail. Okay, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to read on versus I've had 20 years experience in the legal profession and I'm passionate about off to sleep. Yeah. So think about how it could be zany within your world.
I think we might speed ahead. We have a few more questions. I think we have 4 that have come through. Let's see if we can speed through them. So do you have any tips for mature age graduates so that they can stand out?
Good question. So Pip is our recruiting expert, but maybe she'll have a view on that. I think from my perspective, recruiting teams over a decade or so, no view. It depends how mature, but ultimately back to the point on do you reveal how out you are, it's irrelevant. We are looking to assess, can you do the role? And is there anything that I need to be aware of that would mean that you couldn't do the role? If you're talking like you're 70 plus and you may be a little bit scared of technology, and that's an assumption. I know there's many 70 plus year olds that are great with technology, but you might like to address the elephant in the room there and really talk up your data and technology skills, for example. You may have a story around it. And I think if you line yourself up head for head against a graduate, what great experience have you got under your belt because of that time away and in the workforce? So whether you chose to have children, for example, or you were a corporate athlete or whatever you were doing, you could pull that information. What did you learn? What did you apply? And how have you juggled everything to get through your degree, for example? Do you have a view, Pip?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ingrid. And I think that's a really important point. It's really around the skills and potential that you have to bring to the role. So as recruiters, we have a whole lot of different technologies that we use that we can remove names so that we are unable to see sort of gender, background, age from applications and CVs. So more often than not, the recruiter may not even know sort of where you sit, sort of in which particular demographic that you may sit. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. I would think more around what can you bring based on the experience that Ingrid has just discussed. So, have you had a career in another industry before? And how are those skills transferable? And really focus on that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I can add on there. I think it's important to also have the mindset that organizations are looking for. Are you keen to just get in, have a go, learn as much as you can? Doesn't matter what work you're given, you're just going to go in there and smash it. I think they definitely look for that sort of mindset. So I know across our graduate program, Telstra, that we have mature age students, but they have that mindset. They're going to take on any work, just going to smash it out. They're here to learn and they're here to give it a go. So yeah. And I think we also have another live question. Do you have any tips for science students who don't have any actual job experience? And I think this is another question that we had. What about anybody who's never had an actual job before in this particular industry or lab work?
I think I think lab work and research is work experience, and I think if you don't have sort of paid experience in other areas like a part-time job, make sure that you can articulate if you're talking about teamwork and collaboration, that you can link that back to university. So you might talk about a group assignment that you've worked on where you've had to take the lead in ensuring that that's submitted, or it might be responsibilities that you have outside of work that might be relating to a sporting team. So I think you really need to cast your mind wide to think about how parts of your life have formed and shaped where you are and the experiences that you've had and how you can use those experiences. I suppose the other thing that I would really encourage you to do is think about maybe trying to get some part-time work. I know my first role was at Baskin Robbins and I was chief ice cream scooper, but it really taught me how to interact with customers and really the importance of customer service. And that's something that I've carried through my entire working career. So I think try where possible to get that experience. But if you're at the point where you are interviewing at the moment and you don't have paid experience, draw from those other experiences like you might have, for example, in the lab or research that you've submitted or group assignments, and make sure that you talk about those things as well.
I really like that, Philippa. There is such a wealth of communication interview answers out of group assignments. There's always that dysfunctional group colleague, and so using an example where someone was going off this way and how you influenced and corralled to meet the outcome at a certain quality, at a certain standard, can be a beautiful response. If you're working in labs and you're having to adapt your communication style, someone's very directive, others need a lot of support and conversation, etc. Those kinds of things can all be applied. It's how you're managing your friendship circle. Now you're not able to network face-to-face, and you started to lead that group and you had 10 friends on Zoom and we all spoke over to each other. And this is how I attacked that. I moved people into small groups and brought them together. I managed the flow, and I can bring that skill into your workplace and support, X or Y in the role. So you can draw on many examples, but always have a good communication skills response for your interviews.
And I definitely add on to that. I think it's good to have experience in any job or your role in a domain area that you're entering into. But it's also good to use your experience from extracurricular activities, any sorts of volunteering that you've been a part of, or sports. Maybe you have a side hustle or a project that you've been a part of. Leverage those experiences. Maybe you've gone on student exchange. That's something that you've really can leverage in your interviews, because they look at all sorts of experiences to kind of understand you as a whole rounded individual, because at the end of the day, it is a graduate program, and also you don't even need to possibly even apply for graduate programs. I think that's something we also forget about. Entry-level programs are just as good. You don't need to go through a big organization either. You might want to go for a startup, and they look more fondly upon experiences that might not be as cookie cutter that some organizations may look for. And I think we have one more question that we might be able to quickly glaze over, if that's okay with you, Philippa and Ingrid. Is that fine?
Yep.
Yeah. So what are the prospects of careers in wildlife and the environment after the pandemic? It's quite niche. Don't know if you could get your perspectives.
It is quite niche.
Yeah.
And probably not an area of my specific expertise. But what I will say is there are so many different companies out there within the wildlife and conservation space. So I think doing research and reaching out to companies, and these might be the type of companies that you want to do some work experience with for first. And that might be something that's really helpful. I know that it's probably quite a competitive industry as well in terms of getting any kind of graduate programs. And I would say that the funding for those types of roles would be quite small, so it would be competitive. So I would say volunteering in that space would be really important. But I guess in terms of anything additional to that, it's probably a little bit outside of my remit. So I do apologise.
I would say that I'm not sure if this is your path, but we always encourage at CBRE people to have 2 aspirational career paths or jobs. You don't want to just hang your hat on one, because that person might be 20 years in the role. And there's a couple of ways to skin a cat, to use that expression. So is it wildlife? Could you divert and pick up some skills in the world of sustainability? That's certainly a very growing space and world. And how could you're always thinking, if that's where I really want to get and be in that conservation space, what skills do I need? Do I still need to manage a team? I'll go get it, and I'll get it in another role. Is there something on sustainability? Could I work in some legal or compliance role, and therefore I can translate the policies or navigate the detail to make a space protected, etc. So think about what part you want to be in and what a non-linear solution might be for you.
I really like that whole having 2 different career paths, and I think that's something we really need to think about now that our careers are just going to change so quickly. They call it the protean career, I think it is. You just move even different industries, different occupations. So that I think that's a good call out, to be very agile and look at your skill sets to be applied in different sorts of ways, and flex them in different sorts of ways. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. And so in my space, I call that the gig economy, and getting comfortable with, you may be 7 or 8 months in work as a contractor, for example, but you'll earn the money of what you could in a permanent job across the 12 months. So it's a mind game to feel comfortable with that ebb and flow of cash, for example, but certainly, back to your point, Tyrone, you need to be agile, you need to do your research, learn quickly, get in and make an impact and produce for the organisation. And so that is possibly a changing environment that we need to be aware of. I still think there's already 13% of the workforce is contracting, and it will probably go more that way because of COVID and working from anywhere. So that's another little factor. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just guessing, this wildlife conservation role, does it have to be in Australia? Could you do some research for a community somewhere outside of Australia and gather your experience that way as well.
Love it. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Ingrid. Thanks, Philippa. Really passionate about early careers. We can see that. But this nearly brings us to the end of today's event. But before I do close, I would just like to honestly thank Philippa and Ingrid so much for taking the time out of their personal lives to come join us today. And I would just like to extend this to their organization as well. And of course, our partner, CBRE. We're very grateful and thankful for their support that they provide to us here at Out for Australia. So virtual handshake or elbow bump. Moving on, so don't forget to sign up for everybody that might be listening and watching to our mentoring program if you haven't already done so, because it could change your life for the better like it did for me. And you can do that on our website, outforaustralia.org. And you don't necessarily need a mentor in your industry. They can provide you with resume advice or even just giving you a bit of energy for the graduate recruitment process. So just think a bit more laterally about what a mentor could do for you. And in addition, don't forget to stay in the loop, signing up to our Out for Australia newsletter. You can also do this on our website under the Get Involved tab. So you can always keep up to date with what's happening. And I invite everyone to keep the conversation going on our Facebook page if you have any other questions that you may have. And you will also be receiving a short survey upon exiting this meeting, and would love to get your honest feedback so that we can continuously improve the events that we run. So from everyone here on the panel, behind the scenes, and from Out for Australia, and from me, thank you for joining us today. You're great. Good luck in your search for your dream graduate roles or purpose. Stay safe and of course have fun. Is there any last words, Philippa, Ingrid, Ravi, anything at all?
Thank you so much for having us. It was great. Really enjoyed being here, and I hope that there was some value for all of you on the call.
I just wanted to thank you all of you for taking our time today, and then it was really an insightful session. And then I think I have felt like 2 pages of notes, which is going to be great. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.